will be discussing Harry Truman's presidency. First, here's some background info on Truman. He was a Democrat, he was FDR's vice president, and he was president from 1945 until 1953. His motto was "The buck stops here," and he was considered an honest leader. During his presidency, here's a few things he aimed to do and accomplished. He continued FDR's New Deal and called it the Fair Deal, which proposed a raise in minimum wage, increased Social Security benefits, and universal health care. He also created the Truman Doctrine, which was meant to stop the spread of communism. Also under his presidency, Congress gets rid of the Office of Price Administration, which causes price increase of 25% and led to several strikes. The 22nd Amendment was created, which limited the presidential term, and discrimination ended in the armed forces with the Executive Order 9981. He was also the first and only president to authorize the use of nuclear warfare. Next, I will discuss what the Cold War was, the events that occurred in the first few years, and who was involved. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the Soviet Union, the US, and their allies, and it lasted from 1947 until 1991. The two sides were called the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. The Western Bloc refers to the capitalist countries in NATO, and the Eastern Bloc refers to the Soviets, Communists, and the Warsaw Pact. Here the map is showing the blue as the Western Bloc and the red as the Eastern Bloc. Now here are some of the major events that occurred in the beginning of the war. On March 12th of 1947, the Truman Doctrine provided military aid in Greece and Turkey against the communist countries. The Marshall Plan was proposed to provide economic assistance to struggling European countries June 5, 1947. June 24, 1948, Stalin orders the Berlin blockade, and the blockade ends on May 11, 1949, and the Soviet Union begins testing atomic bombs. The next topic I'll be discussing is some of the major leaders throughout the Cold War. First up is Harry Truman, and I already discussed his presidency earlier, but as a recap, he created the containment policy, which was also known as the Truman Doctrine, and he created the Marshall Plan, and he also believed in the domino theory, which was the theory that a political event in one country will cause similar events in neighboring countries. Next is Joseph Stalin, who was a leader of the Soviet Union, and he created communist governments in Eastern Europe after World War II. He was also leader of the Soviet Union when they developed nuclear weapons in 1949. Nikita Khrushchev was also a Soviet Union leader, and he approved the building of the Berlin Wall in 1961, which was built to stop large amounts of East German immigrants from entering West Berlin. He also ordered nuclear missiles sent to Cuba in 1962. Dwight Eisenhower was president from 1953 until 1961 and continued the policy of containment. Ronald Reagan was a U.S. president from 1981 until 1989. He renewed the American defense buildup, and he was credited with convincing Gorbachev to end the war. Gorbachev was the final leader of the Soviet Union, and he spent more money on rebuilding Russia than their military. John F. Kennedy was also a U.S. president from 1961 until 1963. He convinced the Soviets to remove missiles from Cuba. He also adopted the policy of containment, and he initiated the Alliance for Progress, which aimed to establish economic cooperation between the U.S. and Latin America. He was also assassinated in 1963. Lyndon B. Johnson was also a U.S. president from 1963 until 1969 following JFK's assassination, and he helped to expand America's role in Vietnam. Richard Nixon was a U.S. president from 1969 until 1974, and he ended American involvement in Vietnam. The final topic I'll be discussing is the end of the Cold War and some more important events that lead to the end. On April 17, 1961, the U.S. attempted and failed to invade Cuba. This was called the Bay of Pigs. Ronald Reagan visited the Berlin Wall August 12, 1961. In October of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest that the Soviet Union and the U.S. got to actually fighting. In 1973, the U.S. finally pulled their troops out of Vietnam, and the conflict ended in 1975. A treaty on nuclear disarmament was signed in 1987. Between 1989 and 1990, the Berlin Wall was taken down, borders opened, and free elections helped to drive out communist leaders and groups all around Europe. The Cold War officially ended in 1991, and in late 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved into several republics.